Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 has over 300 plus skills in the game, and we can actually push this number to easily over 400 if you include all ultimate attacks, evasives, buffs, awoken skills, etc. But as we all must know, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 has very few skills that are actually usable and actually good. This is because the condition and the meta of the game has changed a lot since the game has come out. But one major factor that Xenoverse 2 can actually pull from is other Dragon Ball games, such as Sparking Zero, Dragon Ball FighterZ, DBZ Kakarot, and yes, even you, Dragon Ball The Breakers. All of these games have interesting ways to actually implement the hundreds of skills in Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 successfully into Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3. Hello everyone, it's me again, Steve Dojo here, back to more Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 to free information. I just want to talk about how super attacks will obviously change massively in Xenoverse 3, mostly because a lot of the super attacks in Xenoverse 2 are very outdated from the way they're presented, and I think one of the best ways to talk about this is actually Dragon Ball The Breakers, because again, I'm going to tell you guys for the 100th time, because new people watch these videos every time, so please understand, Breakers was supposed to be the original Xenoverse 3. At the time of its release, all the updates and features in Breakers, it was the original Xenoverse 3, and one of the best examples of this is how super attacks in Breakers are almost exactly the same as Xenoverse 2, but just outright better. You have moves that have better trajectories, better projectile speeds, faster animations, higher damages in some places, new parts of their animations as well. A good example is all of the melee supers have new parts of their animations because they were obviously made to be, updated for Xenoverse 3, but Breakers in general actually has a really good way of how to do these attacks. Now, I will say one thing. Obviously, not every attack should be done a one-to-one style like Dragon Ball The Breakers. A good example is that some beam attacks are still way too slow, and some melee attacks all have that really cringe dash part of the animation where they just slowly charge towards the opponent. Obviously, if it was, the actual game, you would just do them right away from whichever position you're in, and that would make these moves a lot faster and better executed. Like, even the super unusable ultimate attacks from Xenoverse 2, like Super Spirit Bomb and Father Son Kamehameha, have much faster animations in Dragon Ball The Breakers, making them actually useful. And I'll point out, by the way, in Breakers, characters move faster than they do in Xenoverse 2, and the maps are bigger, so obviously the moves were just designed better because of that. Hell, maybe that's the size of Xenoverse 3 stages if they didn't change it to Dragon Ball The Breakers, because now that I think about it, Breaker stages are massive, and all the projectiles in Breakers are really quick, so they can actually be usable in these massive stages. Which reminds me, even regular Ki Blasts in Breakers, not only do they do damage, but they actually serve a purpose. It's not just for stunning people. They actually are just, a long-range form of damage. That's it. How do you attack someone who's far away from you? Well, you don't just spam, whichever broken super attack you have in Xenoverse 2. You just use your Ki Blast, because that's the way Ki Blasts are meant to be used. Hell, that's the way they work in Sparking Zero as well, and the way they work in Dragon Ball FighterZ. They're a long form of damage, because you can't punch people from the other side of the screen. But in Xenoverse 2, instead, it's just, let's stun the enemy so I can then punch them from the other side of the screen. It's really, really lazy. And it's obviously just, the byproduct of, old failed design. Obviously, that's going to change massively in Xenoverse 3 to just be, hey, what if you could just, use a long-range form of damage? So I think that's the way they'll really just change all of the super attacks and even the regular Ki Blasts. So obviously just be, better to be good. If we work by Breaker standards. But now let's talk about a few more less Dimps era made games. Let's talk about Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and Sparking Zero when it comes to how they can design super attacks differently. Now, I think I'm going to talk about Kakarot first, because Kakarot does have some changes that I think are more realistic for what Xenoverse 3 would actually get compared to Sparking Zero's changes. But Kakarot in general has a bunch of moves that are just really, really damn quick, and for the moves that aren't super duper quick, they just have amazing tracking. A good example is Kamehameha. It's not really a skill you charge up, you just have different levels of Kamehameha that are just stronger, and then you have some versions of Kamehameha that have different firing skills entirely. Like, for example, God Kamehameha, which is just a Kamehameha that you drag around the screen like a laser sword to just cut down multiple enemies or just to hold it down on one enemy. Then you have limit breaking, like what, Super Saiyan Blue Kamehameha, which is a Kamehameha that when you fire it, it releases a massive explosion wherever it hits to try and, maybe hit multiple enemies, or just in case if it misses slightly, it can still hit the initial target. But I think the way they'll do it is that Kamehameha is just a ridiculously fast skill. And they'll probably just make it so the projectile's really quick. Sparking Zero also does the same thing where beams are just really, really quick. Any super attack in general that flies through the air realistically should be fast enough to hit its enemy. And the enemy can react to it because they'll see you doing the charging up sequence and the firing sequence. This isn't even just about moves like Kamehameha, though. Things like Burning Attack, Explosive Demon Wave, all of these other ranged projectiles, obviously, there will be a tell when they're being fired. It's on the player to be able to go, oh, I recognize those energy effects and those attack effects. That must be this character's attack. Now I'm gonna get ready to, guard it, block it, avoid it. I think they can still balance these moves out, even though they'll obviously be quick, because I want to remind you, Kakarot is a single player game, obviously. So when they have moves like Burning Attack, which are really quick, then also have tracking, and then have massive explosions as well. Like bro, Burning Attack, Spirit Bomb. Bro, Spirit Bomb, I'm gonna keep bringing up Spirit Bomb, because in Xenoverse, Spirit Bomb is unusable. In Kakarot, Spirit Bomb is such a good skill. It has like a small charging up sequence of the orb like expanding, and then when you throw the move out, it's not like an instantaneous like fast projectile, but it is a tracking projectile that tracks the whole way through, and it has a ginormous explosion when it reaches its destination. I think that makes it very usable and probably a desirable way to do it for Xenoverse 3. Obviously, I think there's a lot of things that they could still take over. Like, again, Kakarot has beam clashes, Sparking Zero has beam clashes as well. But for Xenoverse, maybe it would be kind of harder to balance beam clashes, because, again, I want to talk about these from the premise that the game doesn't freeze when you do these Kamehameha, like super attacks, right? When you're doing Dragon Fist, Gallic Gun, Special Beam Cannon, Death Beam, all of these different moves, my idea for the game is that it wouldn't freeze, because that's what happens in Xenoverse 2. But in games like Sparking Zero, time does freeze, because it's part of the Tenkaichi series, the Budokai series, whereas in games like Kakarot and Breakers, time does not freeze when you do these super attacks. So wanted to talk about those versions first, because they're, again, more realistic for how things would go. But Sparking Zero is still a future the game could take. They could take the Dragon Ball Fighters approach, they could take the Tenkaichi Sparking Zero approach, where they just go, screw it, we've tried the real-time system long enough, maybe now we'll go for a system where, you know, time freezes or the game slows down so these moves can actually happen. Now, this isn't saying that Sparking Zero only has time freeze kind of super attacks, because again, if you take moves like Kamehameha into account, Super Kamehameha, like just go on Super Saiyan Blue Goku, do his Kamehameha, it's a charge move that happens without the game freezing at all, he just fires off. But a lot of moves in Sparking Zero are time freezing cinematics, so that way, you know, the move can actually happen without just failing to fire or just never firing in general. But I don't think this is too realistic for the Xenoverse series. I'll get to that in a bit. I do want to talk about the benefit though. Sparking Zero's moves do actually bend, they do track. A lot of them bend and a lot of them track, and they track super aggressively too. This is obviously kind of accurate to the way characters have fired moves since the earliest parts of Dragon Ball. Kamehamehas have always bent. They don't need to be a separate skill like bending Kamehameha. Obviously, Xenoverse went for the approach of having separate skills be ones that bend towards people, but realistically in Dragon Ball, even all the way up in like DBS Broly and Superhero, we can think of many attacks that do just curve towards their opponents, even if they curve slightly or if it's a super aggressive kind of tracking. There are many moves like Final Flash, for example. Vegeta used that on Cell and he aimed that downwards, but it still managed to not hit the planet. He just curved it straight backwards, like up after it hit Cell. We have moves do that all the time in Dragon Ball. So I think that would still be a good change. Obviously, it would remove the special functions of a lot of tracking skills that have been added, whether it's bending Kamehameha as a launch day skill or if it's a DLC skill where its unique premise is that, oh, this move curves in the enemy's direction, or it tracks the enemy and chases them down. That could be taken away from certain skills, which would reduce the skill count by a lot if they went for something like that. But I'm still excited to see a version of this where Dragon Ball skills actually do what they do in the anime, which is chase enemies down. Now, chasing enemies down and then also the move still having giant explosive radiuses would be comically unfair, so I'm I'm not sure how they'll do it. They probably won't go for the Kakarot approach, which is it moves track and also have giant explosions, because then it would be a really dumb fight. Like, bro, imagine a parallel quest where you're being jumped by multiple enemies and they're all using their ultimate attacks and they all have tracking and all have ginormous explosive radiuses. You would literally never be able to beat any PQ where you're getting jumped by like more than 2 guys. That'd actually be nightmarish. But yeah, another facet to why they probably won't do the time stopping thing is that it does screw up the balance, and it's probably just impossible to implement if you have more than 2 fighters on the screen. Now, I want to remind you guys, it's not a single player game like Kakarot, and it's not like a take turns kind of game like Fighters, right, where the person that's jumping in is most likely an assist, not an actual separate human player. If you freeze time when you have multiple players on the screen or multiple enemies on the screen, that would just be a mess, or it could kill the pacing of the game a lot. I want to think of a scenario where you're doing a parallel quest and Goku and Vegeta enter and they start with their ultimate attacks. You now need to watch the cinematic of Goku charge up his Super Kamehameha, then watch the cinematic of Vegeta charging up his Final Flash, and then watch the cinematic of Piccolo charging up his Special Beam Cannon, and then, oh my goodness gracious, that's a lot of time freezing to just have you die instantly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's probably not an ideal way to do the game, and that's not even talking about how messy things can get when you try to play the game online and they try to implement time freezes in the middle of other people's connection and stuff like that. It probably just wouldn't work. So I don't imagine that the next Xenoverse game will have this mechanic. I do think they'll just go for what Breakers did and just have the moves be faster and more viable. Again, the moves can still have pretty animations, but you can just speed things up. Have the beautiful animation play after you hit the enemy and the enemy can't escape from it, not beforehand. Again, a lot of Xenoverse 2 moves have learned from this. A good example is stuff like the new Spirit Bomb, where the beautiful animation plays after you hit the enemy. The problem is that they still kept the old animation, which just ruins the whole skill. Special Beam Cannon Beast is a good example of them doing it, right? Because they know the charging up and firing sequence is the really hype part of Special Beam Cannon that everyone wants to do, but they knew that obviously that you can't do that. You literally just, that's not usable. It's too slow. So they made the Beast Kick a feature that when you connect the kick, then you connect the rest of the move. Another great example is Apocalyptic Burst. If it was designed like an older Xenoverse Ultimate, it probably would just play the full animation even if you missed the initial hit, which is just insanely weird, but you know, Xenoverse used to do skills like that. So I'm thinking they'll just go for the new approach where they have the skill actually land on the enemy first, and then you can watch the super cool part play out, and you know, just watch a skill fully connect onto people, right? I think that'd be great, right? A great example of this is the way Sparking Zero does some ultimates. You know, you land, you know, the Daima SSJ4 Kamehameha, and when the Kamehameha connects, then you get to watch the rest of the animation where the character goes even further beyond and adds more to it. I think that'd be a nice way to take hints from. And again, Xenoverse has never been scared of taking things from other Dragon Ball games. Hell, they even took the sparking, like the burst mechanic from Dragon Ball FighterZ. They took that and they just made a limit burst. So I don't think they would be too shy of just incorporating the good parts of skill animations. But I do think that is a great place to end the video. Again, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, then obviously leave a like in the video. Don't forget to subscribe, it greatly supports the channel. And leave a comment down below as to what you'd like to see next, fellas. I do love you all. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time, gang. Take care and peace. Bye-bye.